The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the dawn air as Sophia Calloway clutched her threadbare carpetbag, her knuckles white with tension. Del Rio, Texas, 1878, just another dusty frontier town that promised nothing but more of the same fear that had dogged her all the way from Boston. The platform beneath her feet seemed to sway, though the train had long since stopped moving. "Last call for Del Rio," the conductor shouted, eyeing Sophia impatiently. "You getting off, miss, or riding to El Paso?" Sophia forced her feet to move, stepping down onto Texas soil for the first time. The October air carried the scent of dust, horse, and something unfamiliar possibility, perhaps, though she'd long since stopped believing in such things. "Need help with your bags, madam?" A rough voice startled her, and Sophia nearly stumbled backward onto the train steps. She looked up and up further still into the weathered face of a man whose eyes, startlingly blue beneath the shadow of his hat brim, seemed to see right through her careful facade. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, not the flashy trappings she'd imagined from the dime novels that had been her only education on the West. I can manage, thank you," she stammered, clutching her bag closer. The cowboy nodded once, not pressing the matter. "Suit yourself. Town's that way about a quarter-mile." He tipped his hat and turned away. Sophia watched him go, his long-legged stride carrying him effortlessly across the platform. She took a deep breath, tasting dust and cattle and the faint bitterness of coal smoke. This was it. Her new beginning, as terrifying as it was necessary. The walk into town felt longer than a quarter-mile, the weight of her bag growing with each step. By the time the buildings of Del Rio proper came into view, sweat trickled down her back despite the mild autumn temperature. The hotel on the main street looked respectable enough, its weathered sign proclaiming lodging in faded paint. Sophia squared her shoulders and pushed through the door, the bell above it announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle that belied her inner turmoil. A woman with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Help you? I need a room, please." And Sophia swallowed hard. Information about employment opportunities. The woman assessed her with a swift, practiced glance. "Rooms 50 cents a night. Employment depends on what you can do." Her eyes narrowed. "You running from something, girl?" Sophia stiffened. "I am 22 years old and a qualified schoolteacher. I am not running from anything." Except that was precisely what she was doing, running from memories, from grief, from the suffocating pity of everyone who knew about Thomas and the fire. Running from a life that had collapsed around her like the charred beams of her family home. The older woman's expression softened marginally. "We could use a schoolteacher. Last one left 2 months ago married a cattle baron from San Antonio." She pulled a registry book forward. "Name?" "Sophia Calloway." She signed the book with shaking hands. "Mabel Thornton, I own this place." Mabel pulled a key from beneath the counter. "Room 3, upstairs on the left. School board meets tomorrow evening at the church, 7 o'clock sharp." Sophia nodded her thanks and climbed the narrow stairs, each step an effort of will. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the dusty main street. She set her bag down and sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears that had threatened all day to fall. She'd done. It escaped Boston and the ghosts that haunted her there. But the fear had followed her, settling into her bones like a persistent chill no amount of Texas sun could warm. Morning brought a hesitant sun, and the sounds of a town awakening. Sophia dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, navy blue, high-necked and sensible. She pinned her hair in a tight bun that pulled at her scalp and practiced her most professional expression in the spotted mirror above the washstand. Del Rio proved to be a town of unexpected contrasts. The main street boasted several substantial buildings, a bank, general store, hotel, and church, but between and beyond them were smaller structures and shacks that spoke of the town's frontier beginnings. People moved with purpose, nodding politely as she passed, but offering no conversation. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a plain clapboard building with a small bell tower. Sophia tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating rows of scarred wooden desks. "Looking for ghosts, Miss Calloway?" Sophia whirled around, heart pounding. The cowboy from the train station stood in the doorway, hat in hand, blocking most of the light with his imposing frame. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, backing against the teacher's desk. He smiled, transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. "Small town. Mabel mentioned a new schoolteacher had arrived." He stepped into the room, and Sophia noticed he moved with a peculiar grace for such a large man. "Zachary Vance. I sit on the school board." "You're on the school board?" The words came out more incredulously than she'd intended. His smile widened. "We're not all unlettered cow-punchers out here, Miss Calloway." He gestured around the room. "Previous teacher left in something of a hurry when her cattle baron came calling. Place needs a good cleaning before the children return." Sophia lifted her chin. "I'm quite capable of preparing my own classroom, Mr. Vance. Never suggested otherwise." He settled his hat back on his head. "Board meetings at 7. Till then." With a slight nod, he was gone, boots echoing on the wooden steps outside. Sophia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something about Zachary Vance unsettled her, not in the way that made her want to flee, but in a manner that made her uncomfortably aware of herself, of her heartbeat, of the way her hands trembled slightly in his presence. She turned back to the classroom, assessing the work ahead. Dust covered every surface, chalk marks on the blackboard recorded long-forgotten lessons, and a musty smell pervaded the air. It was, Sophia realized with a sudden clarity, exactly what she needed: simple, physical tasks to keep her mind and hands occupied. By mid-afternoon, she had swept the floors, wiped down the desks, and cleared the debris from the teacher's desk. Sweat dampened her collar and dust streaked her dress, but the physical exertion felt purifying somehow. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the footsteps until a shadow fell across the floor. "Miss Calloway." A woman stood in the doorway, perhaps 30 years old, with a kind face and a basket over her arm. "I'm Eliza Morrison. My husband's the mayor. Thought you might need some refreshment." She lifted the basket slightly. Sophia straightened, suddenly aware of her disheveled state. "That's very kind, Mrs. Morrison. Eliza, please." She entered and set the basket on a desk, removing a cloth to reveal sandwiches, apple slices, and a jar of lemonade. "We're not much on formality in Del Rio." She glanced around the room. "You've made good progress." Sophia accepted the food gratefully, only now realizing how hungry she was. "Thank you. Is there anything I should know before the board meeting tonight?" Eliza considered this as she poured lemonade into a tin cup. "They'll ask about your qualifications, your teaching philosophy." And she hesitated. "Why you've come to Del Rio?" "People here are welcoming but cautious with newcomers." "I understand." Sophia took a sip of the tart lemonade. "I was a teacher in Boston for 3 years. After my family," the words caught in her throat. "After I was alone, I decided a fresh start was in order." Eliza nodded, not pressing for details. "That's reason enough for most folks here. We've all come from somewhere else, carrying our own burdens." She smiled. "Though I should warn you about Zachary Vance." Sophia's pulse quickened. "The cowboy on the school board." That Cowboy owns the largest cattle operation this side of the Pecos, Eliza said with a laugh. He's the main reason our school exists at all, funded most of the building himself. He's a good man, but he has strong opinions about education. I see. Sophia tried to reconcile this information with the man she'd met. And what are his strong opinions exactly? He believes in practical education, reading, writing, arithmetic, of course, but also skills that will serve the children in this environment. He had quite a few disagreements with the previous teacher over her insistence on teaching French poetry to ranchers' children. Despite herself, Sophia smiled. I think I can find a middle ground between the practical and the poetic. Good. Eliza stood. I should let you get back to work. The meeting will be at the church, you can't miss it. After Eliza left, Sophia returned to her tasks with renewed purpose. By late afternoon, the classroom looked presentable, if not perfect. She returned to the hotel with just enough time to wash and change into her other good dress, a deep green that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. The evening air had cooled considerably as she made her way to the church. Stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and lamps glowed in windows along the street. For a moment, Sophia allowed herself to imagine belonging in this place, walking these streets with confidence rather than trepidation. The church was a simple white structure with a modest steeple. Light spilled from its windows, and the murmur of voices could be heard as Sophia approached. She paused at the door, gathering her courage, then pushed it open. 5 people sat in a semicircle of chairs at the front of the church. Eliza Morrison, an older man who must be her husband the mayor, a thin woman with spectacles, a heavy-set man in a banker's suit, and Zachary Vance. They all turned as she entered. Ah, Miss Calloway, Mayor Morrison stood, smiling genially. Right on time. Please join us. The interview was straightforward. Sophia presented her qualifications, answered questions about her teaching experience, and outlined her approach to education. Most of the board members seemed satisfied, nodding approvingly at her answers. Only Zachary Vance remained inscrutable, his intense gaze fixed on her face as if searching for something beyond her carefully composed responses. Finally, he spoke. What brings you to Del Rio, Miss Calloway? It's a long way from Boston. The question, though expected, still sent a surge of panic through her. She forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. I was seeking a change, Mr. Vance. After teaching in a city school, I wanted to experience education in a different setting. It wasn't a lie, not exactly, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Something in his expression told her he knew it. And how do you plan to adapt your city teaching to our community's needs? He pressed. Sophia thought of what Eliza had said about his educational philosophy. I believe education should be both practical and aspirational, Mr. Vance. Children need tools to succeed in their immediate environment, but also windows to possibilities beyond their current experience. She paused. I would never force French poetry on unwilling students, but I wouldn't deny it to those who showed interest either. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Well answered, Miss Calloway. The vote was unanimous. Sophia would begin teaching the following Monday, with 3 days to further prepare the classroom and review the available teaching materials. As the meeting concluded and the board members offered congratulations and departed, Zachary Vance lingered. May I walk you back to the hotel, Miss Calloway? Streets can be unpredictable after dark. Every instinct told Sophia to decline, to maintain the professional distance that had always served her well. But darkness had fallen completely now, and the unfamiliar town suddenly seemed full of shadows. Thank you, Mr. Vance. That would be appreciated. They walked in silence for several minutes, the soft thud of his boots keeping time with the lighter tap of her shoes. The night air carried the scent of wood smoke and the distant smell of cattle. "You're running from something," he said finally, his voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Sophia nearly missed a step. "I beg your pardon. Not my business, I know." He kept his gaze forward. "But folks come to places like Del Rio for two reasons: they're running to something or they're running from something. You don't have the look of someone chasing a dream." Anger flared, hot and unexpected. "You presume a great deal about someone you've just met, Mr. Vance." "Fair enough." He nodded. "Just know that whatever you're running from, it usually catches up eventually. Better to face it head on." They had reached the hotel. Sophia turned to him, words of dismissal on her lips, but something in his expression stopped her, not pity, but a recognition, as if he knew exactly what it was to be haunted. "Good night, Mr. Vance," she said instead, her voice softening despite herself. He tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Calloway. I look forward to seeing what you do with our school." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sophia reviewed the sparse collection of textbooks, organized teaching materials, and created lesson plans that she hoped would balance practical skills with broader education. Townspeople stopped by intermittently, some bringing children to meet their new teacher, others simply curious about the newcomer. Zachary Vance did not appear again, though Sophia found herself watching the doorway more often than she cared to admit. She learned more about him through the casual conversation of visitors that he had come to Texas as a young man after the war, built his ranch from almost nothing, and was respected for his fair dealings even by those who found him intimidating. Sunday morning, Sophia attended church services, nodding politely at the many introductions and trying to memorize names and faces. She was relieved when it ended, the constant socialization exhausting her more than physical labor ever could. As she walked back toward the hotel, planning a quiet afternoon with a book, hoofbeats approached from behind. She turned to see Zachary Vance on a magnificent bay stallion. "Miss Calloway," he called, slowing the horse, "would you care to see more of Del Rio than just the town? It's a fine day for a ride." Sophia hesitated. "I don't have riding clothes, Mr. Vance." "Nor a horse, I expect," he said with a smile. "But I have a gentle mare that would suit you, and Mrs. Morrison might lend you something more suitable for riding. Consider it educational research, seeing the community your students come from." Put that way, it was difficult to refuse. An hour later, dressed in borrowed riding clothes that fit passably well, Sophia found herself mounted on a placid chestnut mare, following Zachary along a trail that led away from town. "Most of your students will come from ranches and farms within a 10-mile radius," he explained as they rode. "Some will travel nearly 2 hours each way for schooling." The landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in scrubby vegetation, occasional stands of trees marking the courses of streams. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse grass, dark dots against the golden-brown terrain. "It's beautiful," Sophia said, surprised to find she meant it. There was a stark honesty to this land, so different from the manicured parks and crowded streets of Boston. "It grows on you," Zachary agreed. "Wasn't much to look at when I first arrived. Seemed like nothing but dust and thorns. Now I see the patterns in it, the way it changes with the seasons, the hidden places where life thrives against all odds." They crested a hill, and he reined in his horse. Before them, a river curved through the landscape, its banks lined with cottonwood trees just beginning to turn golden with autumn. "The Rio Grande," he said. "Boundary between nations, lifeblood of the valley." They dismounted to let the horses drink, and Zachary spread a small blanket under a cottonwood tree. From his saddlebag, He produced bread, cheese, and apples, a simple but welcome meal. As they ate, he asked about her teaching experience in Boston, and Sophia found herself talking more freely than she had in months. He listened attentively, asking perceptive questions that revealed his own thoughtful approach to education. "Why did you really leave Boston, Sophia?" he asked finally, using her given name for the first time. The question, softly spoken, still hit her like a physical blow. She looked away, focusing on the river's steady flow. "There was a fire," she said after a long silence. "My family home. My parents and younger brother were inside." The words came out flat, emotionless, as if she were reading from a newspaper account. Zachary said nothing, waiting. "I should have been there," she continued. "I was meant to be home that night, but I stayed late at the school preparing lessons. By the time I arrived, the house was engulfed. The neighbors had to restrain me from going inside." Her hands trembled and she clasped them tightly in her lap. "You couldn't have saved them," he said gently. "I know that. Logically, I know that." She took a shuddering breath. "But I can't stop thinking about it. What if I had been home earlier? What if I had smelled the smoke first? What if you'd have died alongside them?" Zachary said, his directness startling her. "And what good would that have done?" Sophia looked at him sharply, anger flaring. "You don't understand, don't I?" His blue eyes held hers. "You think you're the only one who's lost family, the only one who lives with what-ifs." He shook his head. "The war took my father and both brothers. I was the youngest, sent west to avoid the fighting. For years, I hated myself for surviving." The anger drained from her as quickly as it had come. "How did you stop hating yourself?" "I realized it dishonored their memory, living half a life, paralyzed by guilt for the simple act of drawing breath." He picked up a stone and tossed it into the river. "They would have wanted me to live, Sophia. Really live, not just exist. I expect your family would want the same for you." Tears welled in her eyes and she didn't try to hide them. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "All the time, of everything, of getting close to people who might be taken away, of making decisions that might lead to disaster, of feeling anything too deeply." Zachary moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. "I'm afraid of everything," she confessed, the words barely audible above the gentle sound of the river. The cowboy reached out then, his calloused hand covering hers with surprising gentleness. "Then I'll be brave for both of us," he said simply. In that moment, something shifted inside Sophia, not a miraculous healing of her grief, but a crack in the wall of fear she had built around herself. She didn't pull away from his touch. They rode back to town as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land. Sophia felt both exhausted and oddly energized, as if some heavy burden had been partially lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you for today," she said as they reached the livery stable, "for showing me the countryside, and for listening." Zachary helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Thank you for trusting me with your story." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Good luck tomorrow, schoolteacher. Those children don't know how fortunate they are." The first day of school dawned clear and cool. Sophia, dressed with care in her blue dress, pinned a cameo brooch at her throat and arranged her hair in its customary neat bun. Her hands trembled slightly as she rang the school bell, but her voice was steady as she greeted each child who entered. 23 students of varying ages filed into the classroom, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Sophia introduced herself, outlined her expectations, and began the process of assessing their educational levels. By midday, she had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. Some of the older boys had minimal schooling, their education interrupted by the demands of ranch work. Several younger children were surprisingly advanced, having been taught at home by educated parents. All of them, however, showed a refreshing directness and practical intelligence that impressed her. The days fell into a rhythm. Sophia found herself adapting her teaching methods to her new environment, incorporating examples from ranching and farming into mathematics problems, using local history to spark interest in broader historical events, and allowing the natural world outside their windows to serve as a science laboratory. Zachary Vance appeared occasionally, sometimes sitting silently at the back of the classroom observing, other times offering to speak about specific subjects: the cattle industry, the geography of the region, basic veterinary science. The children responded to him with respect tinged with awe, hanging on his every word. Sophia found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about his quiet confidence, his thoughtfulness beneath the rugged exterior, that drew her despite her best efforts to maintain professional distance. 2 weeks after school began, a fierce storm blew in from the west. Wind rattled the schoolhouse windows, and rain pounded on the roof with such force that Sophia had to raise her voice to be heard. By mid-morning, concerned parents began arriving to collect their children, fearing the roads would become impassable. By noon, only 5 students remained: the Hernandez siblings, whose parents worked at the general store in town, and the 3 Johnson children, whose ranch lay several miles to the north. Sophia had just decided to dismiss classes entirely when the door burst open, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with Zachary Vance. Water streamed from his slicker and hat as he stamped his boots on the threshold. "Miss Calloway," he nodded, then turned to the Johnson children. "Your pa sent me to fetch you," creaks rising fast. The children gathered their things quickly, excited by the drama of the storm and the prospect of riding with the famous rancher. Sophia helped the youngest button his coat, her concern evident. "Is it safe to travel?" she asked Zachary quietly. "Safer now than later," he replied. "Creek will be over its banks within the hour." He glanced at the Hernandez children. "Your parents are at the store," the oldest girl nodded. "I'll drop these 3 at the ranch, then come back for you too," he told them. "Miss Calloway can walk you to the store in the meantime." Sophia bundled the Hernandez children into their rain gear and wrapped her own shawl tightly around her shoulders. The short walk to the general store was a battle against wind and driving rain that left them all soaked, despite their precautions. Mrs. Hernandez thanked her profusely, insisting she stay for hot coffee rather than return to the school or hotel in the worsening weather. Sophia accepted gratefully, warming her hands around the mug as she watched the storm through the store windows. The rain showed no sign of abating. If anything, it fell more heavily as the afternoon wore on. Occasional customers hurried in for essential supplies, bringing reports of rising water and washed-out roads. "Johnson's Creek has overflowed," one sodden rancher reported. "Water's across the north road a foot deep already." Sophia's worry increased. Zachary had been gone for over 2 hours. The Johnson ranch was only a few miles away. He should have returned by now. Mrs. Hernandez noticed her concern. "Mr. Vance knows this country better than anyone," she reassured Sophia. "If anyone can navigate in this weather, it's him." Another hour passed. The store began to fill with townspeople seeking news or shelter as homes and businesses leaked or flooded. Someone mentioned that the river was approaching flood stage, and the mayor arrived to organize emergency preparations. Just as twilight deepened the gloom outside, the store door opened once more. Zachary stood there, drenched and mud-splattered but intact. His eyes found Sophia immediately, relief evident in his expression. "You're safe," she said, moving toward him without thinking. Barely, he admitted. Johnson's Creek turned into a river, had to take the long way around. He looked at the crowd in the store. Mayors calling for everyone to move to higher ground, rivers going to flood by morning. The next few hours were chaotic as the townspeople organized evacuation to the church, which stood on the highest ground in Del Rio. Sophia found herself helping to carry supplies, comfort frightened children, and set up temporary bedding in the church's modest interior. Through it all, Zachary seemed to be everywhere at once, carrying elderly residents through the deepening water, securing horses and livestock, coordinating with the mayor on rescue efforts. Sophia caught glimpses of him moving through the rain, tireless and determined despite the dangerous conditions. By midnight, most of Del Rio's residents were crowded into the church. Rain still pounded on the roof, occasionally drowning out conversation, but inside was dry and increasingly warm from the press of bodies. Sophia moved among the makeshift beds, checking on her students and offering what comfort she could to frightened families. "You have a gift with the children," Zachary's voice came from behind her after she had soothed a particularly upset little boy back to sleep. Sophia turned, surprised to find him standing so close. "They're just scared. A familiar face helps. It's more than that." His eyes, despite evident exhaustion, remained keen and observant. "You see them really see each one as an individual. It's what makes you a good teacher." The unexpected praise warmed her. "Thank you, and thank you for everything you've done tonight. You've been extraordinary." He dismissed this with a slight shake of his head. "Just doing what needs doing." He glanced toward the door. "I need to check the water level again. The worst should be past by dawn." Sophia caught his arm as he turned to go. "You need rest, Zachary. You've been going since morning." "I'll rest when everyone's safe," he said, but he didn't pull away from her touch. "At least take some food and coffee before you go back out," she insisted. He relented, following her to the makeshift kitchen area at the back of the church. As he ate the simple meal of beans and bread, Sophia noticed a dark stain on his shirt sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his arm. Zachary tried to move away, but Sophia was faster, pushing up his sleeve to reveal a long gash that had soaked his shirt with blood. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Branch caught me when I was helping the Wilson family out of their flooded house. This needs cleaning and bandaging," Sophia said firmly, her fear for him overriding her usual hesitancy. "Sit down and let me tend to it." To her surprise, he complied without further argument. Sophia found clean water and rags, gently cleaning the wound while trying to ignore the solid warmth of his arm beneath her fingers. "Why did you come to Del Rio?" she asked as she worked, partly to distract him from the pain, partly from genuine curiosity. "After the war, I mean. Why here?" Zachary was silent for a moment. "Wanted empty space," he said finally. "Room to breathe, to think. After the killing fields back east, the openness here felt like redemption, somehow." Sophia nodded, understanding completely. "That's how I felt when I first saw the countryside here. Like there was space for all the grief, room for it to dissipate instead of being trapped inside me." "Exactly." His eyes met hers and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that went beyond words. Sophia finished bandaging his arm, her touch lingering perhaps longer than necessary. "Please be careful," she said softly. He covered her hand with his. "Always am." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then someone called Zachary's name from the front of the church, breaking the spell. "Mayor needs me," he said, standing. "Get some rest yourself, schoolteacher. Tomorrow will bring plenty of work for everyone." He was right. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving Del Rio partially submerged and heavily damaged. The next days were a blur of cleanup efforts, rebuilding, and community cooperation unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. School remained suspended as the building was repaired from minor flood damage. Sophia threw herself into relief efforts, organizing children to help where they could safely do so, teaching impromptu lessons amid the cleanup to keep spirits high. Zachary was everywhere during this time, leading work crews, donating supplies from his ranch, which had been largely spared by the flood, even opening his home to families whose houses were uninhabitable. Sophia saw him daily, their interactions brief but meaningful, building on the connection that had begun to form between them. 2 weeks after the flood, the schoolhouse was finally ready to reopen. The night before classes were to resume, Sophia sat on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Beautiful evening," Zachary said, appearing beside her chair. "Mind if I join you?" Sophia gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please do." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching as the colors deepened and stars began to appear. "I have something for you," Zachary said finally, reaching into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "For your classroom." Curious, Sophia unwrapped it to find a small brass compass, its needle pointing steadfastly north. The case was beautifully engraved with intricate scrollwork. "It was my father's," Zachary explained. "Thought you could use it for teaching geography direction, maybe even as a metaphor for finding one's way in life." Sophia traced the engraving with her fingertip, deeply touched by the personal nature of the gift. "I'll treasure it," she said softly, "and use it well. I know you will." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me tomorrow evening to celebrate the reopening of the school." Sophia looked up from the compass, her heart beating faster. "I would like that very much." The dinner marked a turning point in their relationship. Zachary took her to the hotel dining room, which had been decorated with fresh flowers for the occasion. They talked for hours, moving beyond the careful boundaries they had maintained, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. As autumn deepened into winter, their courtship progressed with a deliberate pace that suited them both. Zachary became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing interesting specimens or artifacts for the children to examine, other times simply observing Sophia's teaching with evident admiration. For her part, Sophia found herself gradually shedding the layers of fear that had enclosed her since the fire. Zachary's steady presence, his quiet strength, and his own history of loss and recovery provided an understanding that no one else had offered. The first time he kissed her was on a crisp December evening after escorting her home from a town Christmas gathering. Snow had begun to fall, a rarity in Del Rio, dusting his hat and shoulders with white flakes that caught the lamplight. "May I?" he asked, his voice low as they paused at the hotel entrance. Sophia nodded, her breath catching as he leaned down, his lips meeting hers with gentle firmness. The kiss was brief but full of promise, warming her more thoroughly than the woolen shawl around her shoulders. Christmas brought a proposal, simply stated as they walked along the now placid banks of the river where they had first shared their stories. Zachary offered not grand promises or flowery declarations, but honesty, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared understanding of grief, and the tentative joy they had found in each other's company. "I can't promise there won't be more floods, literal or figurative," he said, holding both her hands in his, "but I can promise to face them at your side." Sophia thought of the frightened woman who had stepped off the train in Del Rio just months before, how she had hugged her fears close like a shield against further pain. She thought of the gradual awakening she had experienced, the slow realization that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to be your wife." They were married in the church on New Year's Day, 1879, with the entire town in attendance. The schoolchildren formed an honor guard, scattering winter berries along the aisle as Sophia walked toward her future. That night, in the privacy of Zachary's ranch house, now their home, Sophia finally gave voice to the realization that had been growing within her. "I'm still afraid sometimes," she admitted as they sat before the fireplace. "I don't think that ever completely goes away." Zachary pulled her closer against his side. "What are you afraid of tonight?" She considered this. "Of this happiness being temporary, of losing you, losing this." She gestured to the comfortable room, the home they would share. "That's normal," he said. "Love means having something precious to lose." He kissed her temple gently. "But we can't live in fear of what might happen. We'd miss all the beauty along the way." "I know," Sophia said, turning to look into his eyes. "And I'm learning to be brave. You've taught me that. But on the days when fear gets the upper hand, then I'll be brave for both of us," he finished. "Just as you'll do the same for me when my own ghosts come calling." In that promise was everything Sophia had never dared to hope for, not just love, but partnership, understanding, a shared courage that would carry them through whatever lay ahead. Spring brought new life to the ranch and to Del Rio. The flood damage had been repaired, crops planted, and life resumed its rhythm with the resilience typical of frontier communities. Sophia continued teaching, introducing new ideas and methods while respecting the practical needs of her students' lives. By summer, she had news of her own to share. A child would join their family by winter. Zachary's joy was boundless, though tempered with a protectiveness that made Sophia both exasperated and deeply loved. "I'm not made of glass," she reminded him as he insisted on helping her down from the buggy one afternoon. "No, you're made of something far more precious," he replied, his hand lingering on her waist. Their son was born on a cold December night, almost exactly a year after Zachary's proposal. They named him Thomas, after Sophia's brother who had perished in the fire, a way of connecting past to future that felt right to both of them. As Sophia held her newborn son, with Zachary's arm around her shoulders, she felt the final pieces of her heart knitting together. The fear wasn't gone. Parenthood brought its own new terrors, its own vulnerability, but it no longer controlled her. "He's perfect," Zachary whispered, gently touching their son's tiny fingers. "He is," Sophia agreed, "and brave already, I think. With parents like us, how could he be otherwise?" Zachary smiled. "Between your quiet courage and my bullheaded determination, he'll be unstoppable." Sophia laughed, the sound free and unburdened in a way it hadn't been since before the fire. "Our family motto, brave enough for whatever comes." "Together," Zachary added, sealing the promise with a kiss. And in the years that followed, through drought and plenty, through the birth of 2 more children, through all the everyday challenges and joys of their life together, they kept that promise. On the days when Sophia's fears threatened to overwhelm her, Zachary's steady presence provided the courage she needed. And when his own demons surfaced, memories of war, worries about providing for their growing family, she became his strength, reminding him of all they had overcome together. Their story became part of Del Rio's lore, the frightened schoolteacher and the cowboy who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to truly live again. And when their children asked, as children do, about how their parents had met, Zachary always began the tale the same way. "Your mother," he would say with a wink toward Sophia, "was the bravest woman I ever met, though she didn't know it yet." And Sophia, Watching her family the life she had built from the ashes of her fears would smile, knowing it was true.